Love, loss, and long-buried secrets have a way of finding their way back to the surface. This is a true-to-life emotional story about betrayal, forgiveness, and the kind of quiet redemption that only comes after decades of silence. I can still feel the cool grain of the bench beneath my fingertips. The letters were shallow, softened by years of rain. Thomas and Lillian, 1977, but they might as well have been carved into me. That was the moment I stopped wondering and finally understood the truth about our love story. It wasn't anger that came over me then, only the ache of recognition. That morning, sunlight had poured through the curtains in ribbons of gold. I had been awake since before dawn, the name Lillian Hart circling my thoughts like a song that refused to end. The storm had washed the world clean. The driveway shimmered with puddles, each one reflecting the pale sky. I buttered a slice of toast I didn't eat and watched the kettle steam. When I caught my reflection in the window, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Something in her eyes had changed purpose where grief had been. The photograph waited inside my purse, folded within my notebook. I slipped on my coat and, before I could talk myself out of it, stepped outside. The air smelled of damp soil and new beginnings. Willow Creek Park lay a few miles from home. I drove slowly, past the bakery where Thomas used to buy Sunday rolls, past the hardware store that still displayed his favorite brand of tools in the window. Everything looked familiar, yet hollowed out as if time had quietly rearranged it while I wasn't looking. As the car climbed the final hill, the park came into view. The pond glimmered under a canopy of green. Children chased each other along the path, their laughter rising above the hum of insects. For a moment, I saw myself decades younger, holding a picnic basket, Thomas walking ahead with our eldest swinging between his hands. The memory broke as quickly as it formed. I parked beneath a willow and stepped onto the path. The air was heavy with the scent of cut grass and the faint sweetness of blossoms drifting from the far side of the park. My shoes left dark prints on the damp earth. Near the maintenance shed, a man was sweeping leaves into neat piles. He looked to be in his 70s, broad shoulders, silver hair, steady hands. "Excuse me," I called. "Were you working here back in the 70s? He leaned on his broom, studying me with mild surprise. "70s? That's going back. I started here around then. Name's Carl. I'm Mary Thompson. My husband used to volunteer here." Thomas Thompson. His face lit with recognition. "Tom. Of course. Good man. Built half the benches we still sit on. Always had a hammer in his belt and a story in his pocket." I smiled, the compliment landing like a small mercy. "You remember him well. Hard to forget folks like him. Quiet, but when he spoke, you listened." Carl's smile faded. He stopped coming sudden, though. One day he just packed up and left. My throat tightened. "Do you know why?" He looked toward the pond, his brow creasing. "Hard to say. There was talk, you know how people were. Something about a disagreement personal. After that, we didn't see much of Lillian either." I felt the air shift. "Lillian Hart?" He nodded slowly. "That's the one. Ran the community garden. Everyone liked her. She could grow roses in gravel." He chuckled, then sighed. "Then some trouble started. Don't remember the details, only that she left town quick. Folks whispered, but I never cared for gossip." "What kind of trouble?" Carl hesitated. "I remember a girl, maybe 12, used to follow Lillian around, sketchbook always in her hands. People thought she was Lillian's niece, but no one ever said for sure. After Lillian left, that little girl stopped coming, too." The park seemed to quiet around us. "A girl," I repeated. "Did anyone know her name?" He shook his head. "Never caught it. She was shy, drew pictures of the pond, the trees, people's dogs. Nice kid." I thanked him, my voice smaller than I meant it to be. I walked deeper into the park, following the curve of the path until I reached the benches along the water. The air shimmered with the smell of algae and sun-warmed wood. Ducks drifted lazily near the reeds. Everything looked ordinary, yet I could feel the weight of ghosts pressing close. Halfway down the row stood a bench older than the rest, its boards gray and worn. Moss crept along its legs. I brushed it aside with my sleeve, and that's when I saw the carving. "Thomas and Lillian, 1977. For a long time I couldn't move. The world narrowed to those letters, the grooves darkened by age. The sound of children laughing across the pond faded until all I heard was my own heartbeat. I sat down slowly. The wood was cool beneath my palms. I imagined the two of them here young, laughing, carving their names in secret while the sun filtered through the branches. I tried to be angry, but what came instead was sadness, because even in betrayal, I could see tenderness. I remembered our last anniversary. Thomas had taken me to dinner by the water. Halfway through the meal, he'd gone quiet, eyes lost somewhere beyond the window. I'd asked if he was all right, and he'd smiled and said, "Just thinking how lucky I've been." I thought he meant us. Now I wasn't sure. I looked across the pond. A young couple was taking photos beneath the trees, their laughter carrying faintly through the air. I envied their unbroken beginning. Then, unexpectedly, I felt something else: gratitude. Because even with secrets, Thomas had given me a life full of love, of children, of small miracles that still surrounded me. Maybe love is never perfect, I thought. Maybe it just learns to survive what imperfection leaves behind. I took out the photograph. The willow in the background matched the one shading this bench. The angle of light, the curve of the pond, it was the same place, decades earlier. They had stood right here. The realization made the air feel thinner. I slipped the photograph back into my bag and pressed a hand to my chest. My heart was steady but loud, like it knew something important had just shifted. I walked toward the maintenance shed again to thank Carl before leaving. He was finishing his work, humming softly to himself. "Find what you were looking for?" he asked. "I'm not sure yet," I said, "but I found something that feels close." He nodded, as if he understood more than he said. "Careful digging into old ground, Mrs. Thompson. Roots can surprise you." "I know," I replied, "but I can't leave it buried." He smiled kindly. "Then I hope you find peace in whatever you uncover." On the drive home, the sky blazed orange, streaked with the last light of day. The radio murmured an old love song I hadn't heard in years, one Thomas used to hum when he worked in the shed. My throat tightened. When I reached the house, I didn't go inside right away. I stood in the yard, the evening air cool against my face, the scent of wet roses drifting up from the garden. Somewhere beyond the hills, a woman named Lillian Hart still existed. Maybe she remembered the bench, the pond, the man who carved his name beside hers. Maybe she remembered more than I was ready to hear. But I knew I would find her. I turned toward the house, the photograph pressed close against my heart. The porch light flickered on automatically, spilling a circle of gold across the steps. Tomorrow, I would start with city records. If Lillian Hart ever lived here, there would be traces, addresses, phone numbers, fragments of a story waiting to be pieced together. I didn't know it then, but the answers I would find next would change everything I believed about mercy, love, and truth. I thought I'd reached the end of the mystery that night, but I hadn't even touched the heart of it. The truth wasn't waiting in dusty records or forgotten addresses. It was waiting in the eyes of the woman who once stood beside my husband and kept his deepest secret. If you've ever gone looking for answers you weren't sure you wanted to find, tell me in the comments below. And don't forget to follow or subscribe, because in the next chapter, The Truth About Grace, I finally meet the woman from the photograph and hear the confession that changes everything.